daughter-in-law told a book club that I was the kind of man who peaked in 1987 and had been coasting on fumes ever since. She said it loud enough that it carried through the sliding glass door to where I was sitting on the back deck. I was holding a glass of sweet tea and watching the fireflies come up over the yard. Same as I'd done every summer evening for 31 years. I didn't say a word. I just set my glass down and started thinking about which phone calls I needed to make on Monday morning. My name is Earl Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. And for the last 14 years, I've let my son believe I was a retired maintenance supervisor living off a modest pension and whatever odd jobs I could pick up. What my son Darren never knew, what he never thought to ask about, was that the little property management side business I mentioned once at Thanksgiving in 2014 had grown into Whitmore Property Services, a commercial facility management company operating across Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas, with 412 employees and service contracts worth just over $78 million a year. I kept a low profile because that's how I was raised. You don't flash what you have. You work, you save, and you let the results speak for themselves when the time comes. The time came. I should tell you about Darren first, because he's not a bad man by nature. He's 36, works in commercial lending at a mid-sized bank in Nashville, makes somewhere around $160,000 a year. He's smart, he works hard, and somewhere in his late 20s, he started measuring everything by how it looked from the outside. His wife Cassandra, Cassie, to everyone except her mother, is a 33-year-old event planner with a client list that runs heavy toward corporate galas and charity fundraisers in Brentwood. She drives a pearl white Lexus SUV, wears clothes I couldn't name the brands of if my life depended on it, and in 11 years of marriage to my son, she has asked me exactly once how I was doing. It was at a funeral. I'm not sure she was actually listening for the answer. The first sign came about 8 months ago. Darren started calling my property the Gallatin House in conversations with Cassie's parents, like it was already a listing. Then it became Dad's situation. Then one Sunday I overheard Cassie's father, a man named Brock who sold a chain of dry cleaning stores 15 years ago and has been living off the proceeds and his own self-regard ever since, tell Darren that sitting on an asset like that with no plan is financially irresponsible at his father's age. His father's age. I'm 67, I run 5 miles every morning, and I do my own taxes. But Brock had decided I was a problem to be solved. The second sign came when Cassie started bringing her event planner friends to stop by and say hello. They would walk through my house with a particular kind of smile, polite, assessing, and make observations disguised as compliments. Oh, the bones on this place are incredible. I love how you've kept it original, Earl. One woman I'd never met in my life actually opened the door to my home office and looked inside before I could say anything. Sorry, she said. Not sorry at all. Just admiring the square footage. My office? The one with the company financials on the desk. I closed the door and didn't say anything, but I started paying attention. The real breaking point was a Saturday in March. Darren called and asked if Cassie's parents could come over for what he called a family check-in. I said fine. They arrived like they were touring a property they'd already made an offer on. Brock walked the perimeter of the backyard with his hands clasped behind him like a general inspecting territory. His wife Judith, who volunteers on 3 non-profit boards and makes sure everyone knows it, went straight to the kitchen and started opening cabinets. Just seeing what you're working with, Earl, she said. We want to make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. In my own kitchen. Brock sat down at my dining room table without being invited and laid out what he called a realistic picture. He talked about property taxes in Sumner County. He talked about maintenance costs on older homes. He referenced the burden on Darren and Cassandra of worrying about a parent living alone, though to my recollection, neither of them had called to check on me more than once in the past 2 months. Then he said, Earl, a man your age with your resources, or lack thereof, shouldn't be trying to maintain a property like this alone. It's not responsible. My resources. Or lack thereof? Darren didn't say anything. He was nodding like Brock was reading from a tablet brought down a mountain. Judith leaned over and touched my hand. We found a wonderful 55-plus community over in Hendersonville. Beautiful amenities. Pool, walking trails, a clubhouse. Very reasonable, units starting around $850 a month. With your social security and whatever you've managed to save, you could be very comfortable there. Whatever I've managed to save. I asked them what they were suggesting I do with my house. Brock said, sell it to Darren and Cassandra at a family price. They need the space. There's a 3rd grandchild coming. He looked at Cassie, who put a hand to her stomach in a way that I understood was meant to soften what was being said. You'd get the equity, they'd get a home with history, and frankly, Earl, you'd be relieving yourself of a burden you probably can't sustain much longer anyway. A burden I can't sustain. I built this house. I dug the footer trenches myself on weekends while my late wife June watched from a lawn chair and passed me cold water. I installed the kitchen cabinets. I built the deck Darren used to do his homework on. This house is not a burden. It is the physical record of everything I spent 30 years becoming. But I just said I'd think about it. That night, I sat on that deck and looked at the yard and thought about my son. The boy I taught to throw a spiral out by the fence line. The boy who cried at his mother's funeral and gripped my hand the whole way through. The boy who, somewhere in the last decade, had stopped seeing me as a person with a life of his own and started seeing me as a variable in his financial planning. The letter arrived 4 days later. Printed on stationery from a law firm in Franklin Brock's brother-in-law's firm, I would later learn and addressed to me formally as if we'd never met. It described what it called a voluntary intra-family property conveyance. I would sign the deed to my house over to Darren and Cassandra. In exchange, they would allow me to occupy the smaller of the two guest bedrooms for a transitional period not to exceed 14 months. They had included a budget worksheet estimating my monthly expenses as a fixed income retiree, which showed me coming up about $200 short every month on average. The worksheet was thorough. It was also based entirely on the assumption that I had nothing. I read it twice at the kitchen table, then I went to my home office, opened the safe I've kept in the floor closet since 2009, and took out what I needed. Corporate charter for Whitmore Property Services, filed in Tennessee in 2010. Audited financial statements for the prior fiscal year, annual revenue, 78.4 million. Personal brokerage statements, liquid assets of 29.1 million. A profile from Nashville Business Journal 2 years prior, the quiet force behind Tennessee's commercial facilities sector. I spread it on my desk and made 4 phone calls. First call was to my attorney, a woman named Frances Okafor, who has handled my corporate work for 11 years. She picked up on the second ring because that's who she is. Frances, my son is trying to take my house. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Tell me everything. I did. When I finished, she said, "What do you want?" "I want documents that make the situation clear, and I want the house protected permanently." Done. I'll have the trust paperwork drawn up by end of business tomorrow. Anything else? Yes. I need you to look into what Arizona has as equivalents in Tennessee. Family intervention provisions for elderly homeowners. They reference something like that in the letter. She made a sound I recognize as barely controlled professional fury. I'll look into it. But Earl, if they actually try to invoke that, they're going to be very embarrassed by what they find. I know. I just want to be ready. Consider it handled. Second call was to my operations director, a man named Clifton who has worked with me for 9 years and knows how I think. Clifton, I need you to pull every contract we have with any entity connected to a man named Brock Landry in Brentwood. Dry cleaning background, now in commercial real estate and investment. He called back in 20 minutes. We've got 2. Landry and Associates leases commercial space in a building on West End that we service, cleaning, HVAC, waste management, and we're in the final stages of signing a 3-year facility management contract with Landry Capital Partners for their new office complex in Germantown. Combined value, about $290,000 annually. Cancel the existing contract. Pull out of the new one before it's signed. Earl, the Germantown deal took 8 months to negotiate. I know what it took. Do it. Third call was to my regional director, a woman named Patrice, who runs our Nashville area accounts. Patrice, Darren works in commercial lending at Pinnacle Heritage Bank in the Gulch. Does our company have any relationship with that bank? Keyboard sounds. We service their main branch and 2 satellite offices. Routine janitorial and quarterly HVAC. Contract renewed 6 months ago. Terminate sites co-production and refer them to Allied Facility Group. That's going to raise some eyebrows. Yes, it is. Fourth call was to my brother-in-law, June's younger brother Ted, who lives in Knoxville and has known me for 40 years. I didn't call him for business reasons. Ted, I need to ask you something. If you watch somebody you love choose the wrong road for a long time, and the consequences finally started catching up with them, would you step in or let them walk it out? He didn't hesitate long. Depends if they can still learn something from it. I think he can. Then let them walk. That's what I figured. The occasion for Cassie's dinner was technically their anniversary. 10 years of marriage, dinner party at a private room at a restaurant in the Gulch, 60 guests. But I understood what it was really about. It was a social confirmation. Darren and Cassandra presenting themselves to the people who mattered, her parent circle, his colleagues at the bank, her corporate clients, as a couple on the rise, building something. Part of what they were building as far as this crowd was concerned was already decided. They were acquiring the Gallatin house. They were expecting a third child. They were ascending. I drove my 2006 Silverado and parked it between two vehicles that together probably cost more than my first commercial contract. Darren met me at the entrance. He looked relieved and slightly nervous, which is a combination I've come to recognize as a sign that he's done something he's not fully comfortable with. Dad, glad you made it. Come on in. The room was warm and loud with the kind of conversation that happens when people are performing slightly harder than usual. Brock was already working the room. He spotted me and waved me over with the enthusiasm of a man who believes his warmth is one of his defining qualities. Earl, come here. Let me introduce you to some people. He steered me toward a cluster of men in expensive casual Friday clothes. This is Earl Whitmore, Darren's father. Earl, this is Greg Sutton. He runs a commercial development fund out of Memphis. And Paul Yates, who's in private equity. And this is Ray Chem. He just closed a mixed-use project in Midtown. They shook my hand. The handshakes were the kind you give someone when you've already decided who they are. So, Earl, Greg said, what did you do before you retired? Maintenance and facilities work. Commercial properties, mostly. Brock laughed. Earl was in the cleaning business, kept the lights on and the floor swept, right, Earl? I nodded. Something like that. Cassie appeared with wine glasses, distributed them to the group, and then held a glass of water out to me with a small smile. Earl takes water, fixed income, watch the budget. She said it lightly, the way you say something when you want it to land, but want deniability if it does. I took the water. Thank you, Cassie. The evening moved forward. Brock gave a toast about legacy and family. Judith made a comment about how thrilling it was that Darren and Cassandra were putting down real roots in a home with history. Several people applauded. Darren looked at me across the room with a complicated expression that I chose not to interpret. Then Brock raised his glass again. I know it's their anniversary, but Judith and I want to share something we're all excited about. He smiled at me the way people smile when they think they're being gracious at someone else's expense. Earl, we want to thank you publicly for what you're doing for this family. Letting the house pass to the next generation. That's real love. That's a man who understands what matters. 40 people looked at me. I hadn't agreed to anything. I had not signed a single document. But 40 people were now applauding under the impression that I had. Darren stepped forward. Dad, I want to say in front of everyone, we're going to take care of you. Cassie's already found a beautiful place in Hendersonville, and we'll make sure the transition is Darren, I said. Not loud. The room didn't go quiet exactly, but it shifted. Yeah? Do you know who services the commercial properties in the Landry Capital portfolio? He frowned. What? The Landry and Associates offices on West End. The building Brock's group uses for their investment operations. Do you know who handles facility management for those properties? Brock's expression changed. Something behind his eyes went still. I don't... Dad, what does that have to do with the company is called Whitmore Property Services? I founded it in 2010. I'm still the CEO. I took out my phone and opened our company dashboard. Current active contracts 941. Current employees 412. Year-to-date revenue. I turned the screen so Darren could see it. Just over 63 million. The room was quiet now. Cassie grabbed Darren's arm. Is this a joke? No joke. The company valuation sits around 78 million on paper. Personal net worth, including real estate holdings in Gatlinburg and Asheville and liquid assets, is approximately $104 million. Brock made a sound. That's not possible. You drive a 2006 Silverado, yes. I bought it used and I maintain it myself because I know how. What I drive has nothing to do with what I've built. I stood up. Here's what's already happened. As of Friday afternoon, Whitmore Property Services has terminated its service contract with Landry and Associates. Brock, your offices on West End are going to need a new facility management vendor by next week. I'd start making calls Monday morning. I looked at Brock steadily. The Germantown project contract, the one your capital group spent 8 months negotiating, we pulled out of that as well before it was executed. You'll need to start that process over. Brock's face went a color I don't have a name for. And Darren. I turned to my son. Pinnacle Heritage Bank, your employer. We service their branch offices. Past tense. I terminated that contract this week and referred them to a competitor. I don't know what that means for your relationship with the bank. I imagine it will prompt some questions. Darren's face had gone very still. Dad, you drafted a legal document telling me I had 14 months to vacate the house I built with my own hands. You had a law firm draw up papers while Brock's people walked through my home taking notes. You sat at my kitchen table and listened to a man tell me I was too old and too broke to manage my own life. And you nodded along. We were trying to help, you were planning. There's a difference. I looked at my son for a long moment. The way you look at someone when you're deciding whether to say the hardest thing. Dad and your mother and I put everything we had into building something. Not to impress anybody. Not to leave you a shortcut. Because that's what a life looks like when you're paying attention. You stopped asking about my life around the time you decided you already knew what it looked like. I picked up my jacket. My house was transferred into a revocable trust on Thursday. Your names are not on it, and they won't be. That's not punishment. That's clarity. Greg Sutton was already on his phone. Lei Chen had stepped away from the table. 60 people were watching in the particular silence of a room that knows it has witnessed something that will be talked about for a long time. Cassie found her voice. You're destroying our life because we were trying to look out for you. You were trying to secure an asset you assumed was available. You made that assumption because you looked at my truck and my clothes and my water glass and decided you knew what I had. You never asked. Not once in 11 years. I walked to the door, then stopped. Tell Lucas and the new baby their grandfather says hello. I'll be at the house Sunday if anyone wants to come for breakfast. I drove home on I-65 with the windows down, the March air coming in cool and carrying the smell of the Cumberland Valley. I sat on the deck for a long time. My phone buzzed with notifications. Someone at the party had been filming, and pieces of it were already moving around the internet. I didn't watch any of them. What I thought about was Darren at 9 years old, helping me carry lumber for the deck we were building. He'd asked me that day why we didn't just hire someone to do it. I told him that when you build something yourself, you know every inch of it, and nobody can tell you it's worth less than it is because you were there. He nodded seriously, the way kids nod when they're filing something away for later. Somewhere between 9 and 36, he filed it in the wrong place. He called at 11:30 that night. I let it ring through. He called again at 12:15. I picked up. Dad, I'm here. I didn't know about the company, about any of it. I swear to God, I didn't know. I know you didn't. You didn't know because you didn't ask. That's a different problem, but it's still a problem. He was quiet for a while. I listened to Brock. I let him run the whole thing, and I went along with it. I told myself it was practical, that we were helping you, but I knew it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't right when they served you that water tonight, and I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either for a moment. The bank called, he said. They want to know what happened with the service contract. It's a conversation I'm going to have. Yes, it is. Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. You don't have to say anything else tonight. Come Sunday. Come Sunday. Come by yourself, leave Cassie home for now, and we'll make breakfast and talk. Okay, bring your appetite. I'm making biscuits. He laughed, short and tired and genuine. Yeah, okay, Dad. The weeks after that were hard in the way that necessary things often are. Darren had a rough stretch at the bank. Not fired, but reassigned. Moved off the accounts he'd been proud of onto work that was quieter and less visible. And he understood what that meant. Brock's Germantown project stalled for 6 weeks, while they negotiated a new facility management contract at higher rates than mine. Cassie lost 2 corporate clients who had been at that dinner and who, according to what Darren told me later, had concerns about judgment. She was shaken in a way I think she needed to be shaken. Brock called me once. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hoped we could be adults about this. I figured we already had been, and that was the problem he was really calling about. On the Sunday 4 weeks later, Darren came over alone. He showed up in a jacket I recognized, one he'd had since his late 20s, before the suits got nicer. He looked like himself again, the version I knew better. We made breakfast together. I handled the biscuits. He managed the eggs badly, the way he always has, overcooking them, and then pretending that was how he intended them. We ate at the kitchen table. I built the year he started middle school. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said. about what I actually know how to do versus what I've been pretending to know. That's a productive distinction. I went back and looked at the projects I was most proud of at the bank, the ones where I felt like I'd actually done something. They were on the smaller, more complicated deals, the ones where I had to actually understand the business. He paused. I've been chasing the big visible stuff for so long, I forgot that I was actually better at the other thing. You always were. He looked at me. Did you ever think about telling me about the company? Your mother and I talked about it. We decided to wait until you were ready for it, not to change things between us. What does that mean? It means that money is a strange thing to put between people. I've seen it change what sons think they owe their fathers, and what fathers think they can ask of their sons. I didn't want you working at my company because it was mine. I didn't want you being careful with me because I had assets worth protecting. I wanted you to just be my kid. He was quiet for a while. I failed at that. You lost your way for a stretch. That's different. I refilled his coffee. You found it again. The finding again is the part that matters. Cassie came the following Sunday. She sat down across from me in the living room, and she didn't try to be charming about it. She just said, I treated you like a problem I had to solve. And that was wrong. I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I just wanted you to hear me say it plainly. I respected that more than a month of apologies would have earned. I hear you, I said. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They adjusted. The Lexus went. They moved to a smaller place closer to Darren's office, and Cassie took on smaller clients, local nonprofits, and community events. The kind of work she told me once she'd always wanted to do before she got focused on the income bracket of her clients instead of the work itself. She seemed, when I saw her in the weeks that followed, lighter than she'd been the entire time I'd known her. One morning, Darren texted me a photo. It was a job posting, junior project analyst at a real estate development firm in Nashville, the kind of role you take if you were starting over and wanted to actually understand something from the ground up. He'd applied. I texted him back, good. He sent a question mark. I sent, you're building something that's yours. That's good. He got the position. The pay cut was significant. He didn't complain about it when we talked, which told me he'd understood something. I still drive the Silverado. I still wear the same boots I've worn for a decade, the ones that know the shape of my feet. I still take water at restaurants instead of wine because I genuinely prefer it. None of that was performance. It was just who I am. I built a life out of understanding that what something looks like from the outside and what it is from the inside are two completely different things, and that people who confuse them don't stay successful for long. If there's something I tell you watching this, it's that the greatest inheritance you can give the people who come after you isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that things have to be earned, and that earning them is actually the good part, the part you get to keep even when everything else changes. Darren's learning that now. His kids will watch him learn it. That's worth more than any deed to any piece of land. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read everyone. I've been sitting on this back deck for 31 years and I've never once confused what something looks like with what it actually is. That's not wisdom I was born with. That's something you earn the hard way, usually by getting it wrong first. What happened with Darren didn't come out of nowhere. That's the part I keep turning over. The consequences he faced, the reassignment at the bank, the strained relationships, the quiet humbling of having to start smaller and slower. None of that was random. It was the natural result of choices stacked on top of choices, each one moving him a little further from the kind of man he was capable of being. When you stop asking questions about the people closest to you, when you let someone else's framework for the world replace your own observations, eventually the gap between what you assumed and what's actually true becomes too wide to step across gracefully. Darren stepped across it in front of 60 people, and it cost him. But here's what I've come to believe. Sitting out here in the evenings with the fireflies coming up, the cost was fair, not cruel. Fair. There's a difference. Cassie grew up in a world that measured people by the visible evidence of their success. Darren drifted into that world and let it do his thinking for him. Neither of them were malicious. They were lazy in the specific way that comfortable people get lazy. Not about work, but about character. About doing the harder thing of actually looking at someone instead of past them. That kind of laziness has consequences too, and they felt them. What I hope they take from it isn't just don't underestimate your father-in-law. I hope they take something deeper. That the integrity of how you treat people, all people, not just the ones who can do something for you, isn't a soft virtue. It's load bearing, it holds everything else up. When it goes, things collapse. That's not karma in any mystical sense, it's just how character works over time. I think about the version of Darren who showed up that Sunday in his old jacket and overcooked the eggs and didn't complain about the pay cut he'd taken to start something real. That version had something the prior one was missing. Not talent, he always had that, but a willingness to be a student again. To not know, to build understanding from the ground up instead of borrowing it from whoever was most confident in the room. That takes a particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with bravado. It's quieter than that. It's the courage to admit the map you've been using is wrong and go back to the territory itself. What I built over 30 years wasn't built on anything glamorous. It was built on showing up, on understanding the actual work, on refusing to pretend I knew something I didn't, and on treating people, the ones mopping floors and the ones signing contracts, like they were worth the full attention of a person who respected them. That's the whole formula. There isn't a secret beyond that. Darren's learning it now. And I think he's going to be better for having had to learn it the hard way than he ever would have been if I just handed it to him. That's the only inheritance worth anything,